Rancher saw a fugitive Apache beauty bathing in the creek behind his home, and her beauty was unique. He woke before sunrise, fed his horses, checked his fences, and listened to the land the way a man listens to an old friend. The creek behind his home was usually quiet, running thin and clear between stones and tall grass. It was a place where deer came to drink and birds gathered in the early morning. Nothing unexpected ever happened there. That was how he liked it. On that particular morning, the air felt different. The wind was still, and the sky held a soft gray color as the sun began to rise. The rancher walked toward the creek to check for signs of animals that might have crossed during the night. As he moved closer, he heard a sound that made him stop. It was not the splash of an animal or the call of a bird. It was careful human movement. He stayed hidden behind a tree, his heart beating faster. In those days, the land was tense. Soldiers, lawmen, and trackers often passed through, searching for people who were trying to survive in a world that no longer welcomed them. Trouble traveled quickly, and anyone caught in the middle could lose everything. Through the tall grass, he saw her. She stood at the edge of the creek, unaware that anyone was nearby. She moved slowly, as if every step required effort. Her clothes were worn and dusty, clearly from long days of travel. She knelt by the water and washed her face and hands, using the cool stream to ease her exhaustion. There was nothing careless or bold in her actions. Everything about her showed caution. The rancher knew immediately that she was Apache. He had seen Apache people before, mostly from a distance, often through the stories others told, stories filled with fear, anger, and misunderstanding. But the woman in front of him did not look dangerous. She looked tired. She looked human. Her face carried signs of hardship, but also a quiet strength that caught his attention. Her beauty was not loud or dramatic. It came from the way she carried herself, even when she believed she was alone. There was dignity in her movements, a calm that seemed to come from deep within. It was the kind of beauty shaped by survival, not comfort. The rancher felt uneasy, not because of her presence, but because of what it meant. A lone Apache woman near his land was not there by accident. She was likely running from something or someone. If others were searching for her, they might soon come through his property. Helping her could bring danger. Ignoring her could bring regret. He stayed still, watching from a distance, unsure of what to do. The woman finished washing and sat on a flat stone near the water. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the morning sun warm her face. It was clear she had not rested well in a long time. The rancher noticed small details, how thin she was, how her hands trembled slightly, how she kept turning her head to listen for sounds beyond the creek. She was alert, even in rest. A sudden crack of a branch under the rancher's boot betrayed him. The sound was small, but it was enough. The woman's eyes opened instantly. She stood ready to flee, her body tense like a deer sensing danger. Their eyes met across the narrow stream. Time seemed to slow. The rancher raised his hands slightly, a silent gesture to show he meant no harm. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He understood that words could make things worse. The woman studied him carefully, her gaze sharp and searching. She was deciding whether he was a threat. For several long seconds, neither moved. Finally, she took a step back, then another, keeping her eyes on him the entire time. She did not run. She simply retreated into the brush, disappearing as quietly as she had appeared. The creek returned to silence. The rancher stood there long after she was gone. He felt unsettled, not frightened but changed. The image of her tired face stayed with him as he returned to his house. He tried to continue his daily work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the creek. He wondered how long she had been traveling, what she had lost, and who might be chasing her. As the day passed, distant sounds carried across the land. Hoofbeats, voices, the kind of noise that did not belong to peaceful ranch life. His worry deepened. He knew the signs. Searchers were nearby. By late afternoon, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. A small group of armed men rode past his property line, scanning the land as they went. They did not stop, but their presence confirmed his fear. The woman was not just passing through. She was being hunted. That night the rancher sat alone by his small table, barely touching his food. He stared at the lantern light, thinking about the choice fate had placed before him without asking. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt responsible. He thought about the stories he had believed for years, stories told by people who had never looked closely at those they feared. That morning he had looked. He had seen something real. When he went to bed, sleep did not come easily. Every sound outside made him sit up listening. Part of him hoped she had already moved far away. Another part hoped she might return to the creek where at least there was water. Before dawn, he rose again. He stepped outside, the sky still dark, and walked quietly toward the creek. The land felt heavy with silence. He did not know what he would do if he saw her again. He only knew that pretending nothing had happened was no longer possible. Behind his home, the creek flowed on, unchanged, as if it held secrets it would never tell. The rancher stood at its edge, waiting, unaware that this brief encounter had already set his life on a new path, one shaped not by fear, but by a single moment of human connection he could not forget. The sun had barely risen when the rancher noticed signs near the creek. The grass was pressed down and footprints marked the damp soil along the water's edge. She had been there again during the night. The thought brought both relief and worry. Relief because she was still alive. Worry because staying close meant danger for both of them. He returned to his house and stood quietly for a long moment, thinking. The land felt different now, as if it were holding its breath. He knew that searchers were nearby. He also knew that the woman could not keep running forever without help. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion were enemies just as dangerous as armed men. By mid-morning, he made a choice. He filled a small cloth bag with food, dried meat, bread, and a flask of water. He did not carry a weapon. He walked slowly toward the creek, making sure his steps were heard this time. He did not want to surprise her. If she was there, she deserved warning. He stopped a few steps from the water and placed the bag on a flat rock. Then he stepped back and waited. Minutes passed. Then more, just as he began to think she would not come, he saw movement among the trees. She appeared quietly, her eyes fixed on him. Her body was tense, ready to run if needed. He spoke softly, choosing simple words. He told her the food was for her. He said he would leave if she wanted. He did not ask her name. He did not ask why she was there. He understood that trust did not grow from questions. She watched him carefully. Her face showed caution but also deep tiredness. Hunger won over fear. Slowly, she stepped forward and took the bag. She nodded once, a small gesture but full of meaning. The rancher stepped away and returned to his home. That night, he saw a small fire glow faintly near the creek, hidden among rocks. She was still there. He did not approach. He respected her space, but he stayed awake, listening to the land, ready to act if danger came. Over the next few days, this silent exchange continued. He left food and water at the same spot. Sometimes it was gone by morning. Sometimes he would catch a brief glimpse of her watching from a distance. They spoke only a few words, always careful, always calm. Little by little, he learned her story, not through long talks, but through broken phrases and quiet understanding. She was running from forced removal. Her people had been pushed from their land, rounded up, and treated as if they did not belong in the world they had always known. She had escaped during the chaos, moving at night, hiding during the day. She had lost family members along the way, some captured, some gone forever. She did not speak with anger. She spoke with sadness and strength. She had accepted that survival required silence, patience, and constant movement. The rancher listened more than he spoke. He felt shame for how little he had understood before. From his porch, the land had always seemed peaceful. He now realized that peace depended on who you were and where you stood. Her beauty, he came to understand, had nothing to do with appearance alone. It lived in her endurance, in her ability to keep going when the world seemed determined to erase her, in the way she still showed kindness, even when kindness had rarely been shown to her. One afternoon, distant sounds reached them again. Horses, voices, closer this time. The woman stiffened, her eyes scanning the horizon. She knew the signs well. The search was tightening. She could not stay. The rancher told her of an old trail that led through rocky hills where horses struggled to pass. He explained where water could be found and where she should avoid traveling. He gave her a small map scratched onto a piece of wood, not perfect but helpful. She listened carefully, memorizing every word. Before leaving, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly. It was her way of saying thanks, deeper than words. She disappeared into the hills before sunset. That evening, the searchers arrived at the ranch. They asked questions. Had he seen anyone, any signs? Any fires near the creek? The rancher answered calmly. He said travelers passed through now and then. He said animals often made tracks near the water. He said nothing more. His voice did not shake, but his heart did. The men searched briefly, found nothing, and moved on. When night fell, the rancher sat alone again, staring into the darkness. He did not know if the woman would survive the journey ahead. He only knew that, for a short time, their paths had crossed, and neither of them would be the same. The land grew quiet once more, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with memory, choice, and the quiet weight of doing what was right when no one was watching. Far away, the woman moved through the hills, guided by stars and instinct. She carried little with her, but she carried hope. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind, the kind that survives. And behind her, on a small ranch by a quiet creek, a man learned that real courage often begins with seeing another person not as a threat, but as a human being trying to live. Days passed after she left, but the rancher could not return to his old routine. Every task felt slower, heavier. When he checked the fences, his eyes kept drifting toward the hills. When he fed the horses, his ears searched for distant sounds. The land was the same, yet everything felt changed. On the third morning, he noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the creek, where the water bent around a cluster of stones, fresh footprints appeared again. Smaller than his own. Careful, light, she had returned. His first feeling was fear. If she had come back, it meant the danger had grown, not faded. People on the run did not return to the same place unless they had no other choice. He stood still for a long time, weighing his thoughts. Then he slowly walked toward the creek, making sure his steps could be heard. She emerged from behind a tree, thinner than before, her face drawn with exhaustion. Dust covered her clothes, and her eyes showed the strain of many sleepless nights. She looked at him without fear this time, only deep tiredness. She spoke first, her voice low. The path through the hills had been blocked. The searchers had moved faster than expected. She had hidden for 2 days without food. Her strength was fading. The rancher felt a tightness in his chest. He knew what bringing her closer to his home meant. But he also knew he could not turn away now. He told her she could rest near the creek for a short time, not long, just enough to recover. He promised to keep watch. They did not shake hands. They did not smile. Trust between them was quiet and careful, like stepping across thin ice. But it was real. He brought her food and clean water. He showed her a hidden spot among thick bushes where smoke could not be seen easily. He taught her the times of day when riders were most likely to pass. She listened closely, learning the rhythms of the land as he had over many years. As the hours passed, their silence grew more comfortable. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not. Words were not always needed. She told him more about herself in small pieces. About growing up close to the mountains, about learning which plants healed and which harmed, about how her people listened to the earth the way others listened to clocks. She spoke without bitterness, even though her story carried loss. The rancher shared little about himself, but she could see his life written into his hands, his posture, his quiet manner. A man shaped by long days, hard work, and solitude. That night the wind shifted. Sounds traveled farther. From his porch the rancher heard distant voices. Laughter, the clink of metal, too close. He moved quickly but calmly. He signaled for her to stay hidden. He covered the small fire and scattered the ashes. He led her to a narrow path that curved through rocks and trees, a place few noticed unless shown. They waited there together, hidden in darkness. Hours passed. Horses moved nearby. Shadows crossed the land. At one point, a lantern glow came close enough that the rancher could hear breathing and low conversation. He felt the woman beside him tense, her muscles ready to spring. He placed his hand gently on the ground between them, a silent signal to stay still. The moment passed. The riders moved on. When the danger faded, the woman let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She looked at him, her eyes shining with something new, not fear, not sadness, but trust. In that shared silence, something unspoken formed between them. Not romance, not promises, but respect. Two people from different worlds, bound for a brief time by circumstance and choice. By morning, she was stronger, she stood straighter. Her eyes were clearer. She told him she could not stay another night. The risk was too great. He agreed. Keeping her there would only draw danger closer. He gave her supplies he could spare. A blanket, more food. Directions to a dry riverbed that would hide her tracks. He warned her of places to avoid. Before she left, she did something unexpected. She reached into a small pouch and pulled out a carved stone, smooth and worn. She placed it in his hand. It was a symbol of protection from her people, she explained softly, something carried for luck and guidance. He closed his fingers around it, deeply moved. She looked at the creek one last time, then at him. She nodded once and turned away, walking steadily into the trees until she blended with the land itself. The The rancher stood there long after she was gone. Later that day, riders came again. This time they were more aggressive. They searched the creek, questioned him sharply, and examined the ground. One of them noticed disturbed soil near the water. The rancher explained calmly. He spoke of animals, of storms, of travelers who passed through without stopping. He met their eyes without challenge or fear. They found nothing that proved otherwise. When they finally left, dust rising behind them, the rancher felt his knees weaken. He sat on a rock by the creek, the carved stone heavy in his pocket. He realized something then. Helping her was no longer just an act of kindness. It was a stand, quiet but firm, against a world that demanded he look away. Days turned into a week. No sign of her, no sign of searchers either. The land slowly returned to its usual stillness, yet the rancher was not the same. He noticed things he had once ignored. How the land bore marks of many lives, not just his own. How stories lived in footprints, in broken branches, in silent paths. How easy it was to believe simple stories until you met someone who proved them wrong. At night, he sometimes held the stone and wondered where she was, whether she had found safety, whether she was still moving under the stars, guided by instinct and hope. Far away, the woman continued her journey. She carried with her not only supplies, but the memory of a place where she had been seen, not hunted, where help had come without demand. That memory gave her strength when her legs ached and her path seemed endless. And on a quiet ranch by a narrow creek, a man learned that trust does not need many words, and that even small choices can echo far beyond the moment they are made. The days that followed were filled with waiting. Not the calm kind of waiting the rancher was used to, but the heavy kind that sits in the chest and refuses to leave. Every morning, he woke before dawn and listened. Every night, he lay awake longer than usual, alert to sounds carried by the wind. The carved stone the woman had given him stayed in his pocket. He did not treat it like a lucky charm, but like a reminder. A reminder that choices mattered, even quiet ones made far from crowds and courts. For a short while, the land stayed peaceful. No riders passed. No voices echoed across the hills. The creek flowed as it always had. Yet the rancher knew this peace could break at any moment. Then one afternoon, it did. He was repairing a fence when he saw dust rising in the distance. This time, it was more than a few riders. It was a group moving with purpose, spreading out as they approached. They were not passing through. They were searching carefully. The rancher's heart sank. He finished his work slowly and returned to his house, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic would help no one. He thought about the woman. If she was anywhere nearby, she would be in danger. If she had already moved on, then his task was to make sure no one followed her trail. The riders arrived before sunset. They dismounted and began asking questions immediately. Their voices were firm, impatient. They wanted to know if he had seen anyone, if he had noticed fires, tracks, signs of movement. Their eyes scanned his land as they spoke, measuring his words against the ground itself. The rancher answered simply. He spoke of animals, of travelers who sometimes crossed the land, of nothing unusual. He did not offer extra details. He did not act offended or afraid. He kept his voice steady. One man walked toward the creek while the others stayed near the house. The rancher watched him closely, his hands clenched at his sides. The man studied the ground, the stones, the grass. He crouched, touched the soil, then stood again. For a moment it seemed he might say something, but then another rider called out and the man turned away. The search continued until nightfall. They found nothing they could prove. Frustration showed on their faces. Finally, they gathered and moved on, their lanterns fading into the darkness. The rancher did not relax until the sounds were completely gone. That night he sat alone on his porch, staring at the stars. He knew this was not over. Searches like this did not end quickly, and if the woman returned again, the risk would be greater than before. As if the land itself had heard his thoughts, the next sign appeared 2 mornings later, a small mark on a tree near the creek. A symbol scratched lightly into the bark. He recognized it from what she had told him before. It meant she was nearby, but watching. His breath caught. He waited until evening, then walked slowly to the creek, careful to leave no clear trail. He spoke softly into the quiet, using the few words he knew would not alarm her. She stepped out from behind the trees, thinner still, but standing tall. She told him the path ahead had become dangerous. Patrols were spreading wider. She had been forced to circle back, moving at night, hiding during the day. She could not pass through the open land without help. The rancher felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him again, heavier than ever before. Helping her now meant more than food and directions. It meant risk that could not be ignored. If she stayed, even briefly, discovery could cost him everything he had built. His land. His freedom, his life as he knew it. He looked at her and saw not a problem, not a threat, but a person pushed into a corner by forces far larger than herself. He told her the truth. That staying was dangerous. That he might not be able to protect her if the searchers returned in force. He did not pretend to be brave or powerful. She listened quietly, then said she understood. She said she had never expected safety to last. Survival to her had always meant moving forward no matter the cost. Still, she asked for one night, just one, to rest, to gather strength, to leave before dawn. The rancher agreed. That night was the longest he could remember. He kept watch while she rested in the hidden place near the creek. He moved quietly across his land, listening, watching, feeling every shift in the air. Every sound made his heart jump. An owl's call, a branch snapping, the rush of wind. He thought about how easy it would be to step away from all this, to say no, to close his door and let the world continue as it always had. But once you truly see someone, he realized, turning away is no longer simple. Near midnight, distant sounds returned, faint but real. Horses again, the rancher moved quickly. He woke her with a soft call and led her along a narrow, dry channel that cut through the land like a scar. It was difficult to follow and easy to miss. He had never shown it to anyone before. They moved without speaking, their steps careful, their breathing shallow. The riders passed close, close enough that the rancher could hear low voices and the soft jingle of gear. They paused near the creek, lantern light sweeping across the water. The woman crouched low, her hand pressed against the earth as still as stone. Time stretched. Then, slowly, the voices moved away. The lantern light faded. When the danger passed, the woman looked at the rancher with deep seriousness. She said this was the last time. She would not return again. Staying near him put him at too much risk. Before dawn, he gave her everything he could spare. Food, water, another blanket. He marked a new path for her, one that would take her farther from settled land into places fewer people dared to go. She thanked him quietly. There were no tears, no long goodbyes. She had learned long ago not to linger. As the first light of morning touched the hills, she left. The rancher watched until she disappeared, knowing this time was different, knowing he might never see her again. Later that day, the searchers returned one final time. They questioned him harder than before. Their patience was gone, but still they found nothing. When they left, the rancher stood alone by the creek, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. He understood now that this chapter of his life was closing. The land would go on, the creek would keep flowing, but something within him had shifted forever. He had been tested not by force but by choice. And though the future was uncertain, he knew one thing clearly. When the moment had come, he had chosen to stand on the side of quiet courage, even when no one else would ever know. Time moved forward as it always did. Days became weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. The searchers never returned after that last visit. The land settled back into its familiar rhythm. The creek flowed quietly, the birds returned, and the wind brushed through the grass like a soft breath. To anyone passing by, the ranch looked the same as it always had. But for the rancher, nothing was truly the same. He went on with his daily work. He fixed fences, cared for his animals, and tended to the land. Yet his movements were calmer now, more thoughtful. He noticed small things he once overlooked, the way the sunlight changed color near dusk, the patterns of tracks near the creek, the silence that followed a long day. The land felt deeper, as if it held layers of stories beneath its surface. Sometimes, when he stood by the creek in the early morning, he remembered the first time he had seen her there. The memory did not bring fear anymore. It brought a quiet respect. He wondered how far she had gone, what paths she had taken, and whether she had finally found a place where she could rest without fear. He never spoke of her to anyone, not to neighbors, not to passing travelers. Some moments were meant to stay private, protected by silence. He understood that now. Words could weaken what memory kept strong. The carved stone remained with him. He carried it often, though sometimes he placed it on a shelf near his bed. It reminded him that even brief encounters could leave lasting marks. That one small choice could echo through a lifetime. As seasons changed, new people passed through the land. Some were travelers looking for work. Others were families searching for a place to settle. The rancher listened to their stories with more care than before. He no longer accepted simple explanations or easy judgments. He had learned that every person carried a history shaped by forces unseen. One evening, a young boy traveling with his family asked the rancher if he had ever seen anything unusual living so far from town. The rancher smiled faintly and said that the land showed you many things if you paid attention. Some you understood right away. Others took years to make sense. The boy did not fully understand, but he nodded anyway. At night, when the stars filled the sky, the rancher sometimes imagined the woman looking up at the same stars somewhere far away. He hoped they had guided her safely. He hoped she had found people who saw her not as something to fear, but as someone worth protecting. He knew he might never know the truth, and he accepted that. Years later, the world around the ranch slowly changed. New laws came, old ways faded, and the tension that once filled the land eased little by little. The rancher grew older. His steps slowed, and his hands bore the marks of a life spent working honestly. One afternoon, while resting near the creek, he noticed new footprints in the soil. Not hers, smaller, children's footprints. A nearby family had settled close to the water. Their laughter drifted through the air, light and free. The sound warmed him. He realized then how important it was that the creek remained a place of life, not fear. A place where people could drink, rest, and feel safe, even if just for a moment. As time passed, the rancher became known as a quiet, fair man. Someone who minded his own business but never turned away a traveler in need. He did not offer grand speeches or strong opinions. He simply acted when action was needed. People trusted him, even if they did not know why. Late in his life, on a cool morning when the air felt thin and clear, the rancher walked one last time to the creek. He sat on the familiar rock where he had once left food for a stranger. The water moved gently, just as it always had. He took the carved stone from his pocket and held it in his palm. He thought about how fear had once shaped his understanding of the world. How easy it had been to accept stories told by others without question. And how one quiet morning had changed that forever. He had learned that courage did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it simply stood still when running away would have been easier. As the sun rose higher, he placed the stone at the base of a tree near the creek. Not as a goodbye, but as a thank you, for the lesson, for the reminder, for the moment that had opened his eyes. He stood slowly and walked back toward his home, leaving the creek to carry its secrets forward. Far away, perhaps in another valley or near another stream, the woman lived on in her own way. Maybe she had found safety among her people. Maybe she had built a quiet life shaped by resilience and memory. Wherever she was, the strength that had carried her across the land still lived within her. Their paths never crossed again, but they did not need to, because some stories are not meant to continue side by side. Some are meant to touch briefly, change both lives, and then move on. And so the land remembered, the creek flowed, the hills stood watch. And a simple act of compassion unseen by the world lived on, not in history books or loud tales, but in the quiet truth that even in hard times, humanity could still choose kindness. That was the legacy of the rancher and the fugitive woman, not fame, not reward. Just the knowledge that, when faced with a moment that mattered, they had chosen to see each other clearly. And sometimes that is enough.